Yeah, my name is Kingsley Amoako. I work with the Ministry of Food and Agriculture in Ghana. Ghana has worked from both policy and practice spaces to gradually introduce agroecology into its policies and practices. Let me say that you will not find the word agroecology in our policy statement, but you find a policy state objective that creates the space for agroecology to also thrive, in addition to other approaches that stakeholders believe are contributing to food security, such as nature-based solutions, conservation agriculture, regenerative agriculture. So we are looking at sustainability principles that contribute to food security in the policy space. Besides that, government has also engaged CSOs who are into agroecology so that we understand each other's perspective, and then we can work together so that in the future, when the policy is being revised, then we can also take on board concerns of stakeholders, not only agroecology, but other stakeholders as well. If you go beyond that one, let's look at the bigger picture. If you're talking about agroecology and the other approaches, you need to ensure that you have the structures in place and then the systems to support these approaches. So government has, beside agriculture, created an enabling environment for private sector to start producing compost, for example, in large quantities that will be able to support the use of organic fertilizer as part of the agroecology and sustainability principles. So that is the bigger picture that government is doing. And then in practice, government has also included the organic fertilizers, which are compost, and then some of the liquid fertilizers, organic fertilizers, into its initiatives where it provides subsidy for farmers to be able to acquire these products and then use it in the agricultural production activities. One will ask the question, is it agroecology? Yes, the principles are many, but we believe that you have to start from somewhere and then gradually build upon that principle by principle, and then you realize that you will be there. Besides government initiatives, projects that are also being implemented under the government leadership are also supporting farmers who are interested in the use of organic agricultural inputs, such as organic fertilizers and then organic pesticides and those other things. So these are things that are happening both in policy and also in practice. If I want to be brief, at least these are the broad areas that we are gradually integrating the agroecology principles into policy and into practice. Besides that, we are also building capacity of extension service providers to be able to support farmers to be able to produce their own compost, because over the last 10-15 years, we have supported farmers who are interested in preparing their own compost to use. And those we have supported with simple equipment for them to construct structures and then giving them training. So after harvest, and then the household waste that are biodegradable, they pile them up in a certain format so that it decomposes and becomes fertilizer for them to use in their cropping season. So these are what is happening in the country. If you look at the NDCs, the focus has been on temperature. Of course, once temperature comes in, it affects agricultural production systems, and therefore there's the need for you to adapt. And agroecology, I see it as one of the adaptation mechanisms. Reviewing the NDC, actually you need to focus or start with where are your emissions, greatest percentage of your emission contribution as a country. That is why it has focused mainly on mitigation. But of course, if we are looking at agriculture, globally they are claiming agriculture contributes so much, but personally, I don't think that is that correct, because if you want to delve deep, they might be bringing on board other sectors that are related to agriculture and then bulking all of them to under agriculture. So in the review of the NDCs, if agriculture emissions are not the targets, then the country definitely focuses on where the emissions are larger and it takes steps to reduce the emissions from that sector. Of course, so in Africa and most of the African countries, you find agriculture featuring under adaptation. And when we talk about adaptation, it is broad. Every country has its own priority areas. There are countries that don't want to hear anything about climate smart agriculture. There are countries that don't want to hear anything about regenerative agriculture. There are countries that don't want to hear anything about nature-based solutions. Of course, there are countries that are also focusing on these ones. In the same way, there are countries that will have agroecology as a priority. But as part of the negotiation principle, you open it up and make sure that all these country priority areas are brought on board to the negotiation space, so that you try to create a decision that will be encompassing enough to allow countries to choose which approach they want to use to implement their NDCs. And also, once it finds its way into the negotiations and then the decisions. So that is how I look at it. A country, let me use my country, Ghana. We haven't talked about agroecology. Our first NDC and the second NDC has looked at climate smart agriculture because we have a national strategy and action plan on that one. So if you have such a document, you cannot say that you dump it somewhere and then you go and pick something that you don't have a policy to back, you don't have any strategy action. So going forward in reviewing the NDCs, we have started engaging the CSOs, including those who are interested in agroecology, to see how we can bring that into the space. And then the critical things that we also need to look at, once you are talking about a policy document that you need to report on, we are looking at indicators that are comprehensive enough and easy to measure. So as we discuss these ones, these are some of the issues that we need to bring to the fore when we engage the CSOs who are involved in agroecology and want to find space in the NDC review and also the NAPS. Because once we agree as a member of the UNFCCC, you are bound to report on your actions. And we'll be grateful if we could engage and agree on clear indicators that if we find these ones in the space of the review process, we could also measure and then report on. One of the questions we ask ourselves, if you're talking about the social bit of the agroecology, what are the indicators? How easy are they to be measured? So it may be that we need to critically look at the principles and then identify which ones can be quantified, and then we can incorporate them in the NAPS and then in the NDC review. I don't know how the promoters of agroecology will look at, because some of them think that if you don't have all the 13 principles, then it is not agroecology. But assuming that there's a principle on livestock and a farmer is not doing livestock, do you force it in the measurement? No, it's not possible. So these are the things that we need to discuss for all of us to come to a common page, so that we can also incorporate some of these principles as part of the indicators to measure. And of course, they should be measurable. If they are not measurable, it will be difficult to incorporate them in the NDC and the NAPS. In the UNFCCC discussions, agroecology started coming up, I think about 2 or 3 years ago. And anytime it comes up, the question is, what is agroecology? Negotiators don't understand it in the space of UNFCCC. And some of the questions that I've just raised, social issues, how do you measure them? Because whatever decision that you agree on at the UNFCCC, you definitely have to come back to report on them. And therefore, we are careful. We have asked that we need to understand it before we can discuss and then take a decision on it. So as part of the decisions, I think the last Sharm el-Sheikh joint work on agriculture, it has come up as one of the training topics, sustainable agriculture principles, and we have listed a lot of them. So when it's time for proposing topics, this is where I will suggest that the AFSA and its coalition NGOs should now lobby negotiators so that it can come to the fore as one of the topics which will be discussed during the SBs. Once we discuss and then it finds its way, when we understand it clearly, then we also go further to look at which indicators can be used. Then definitely it can come to the table or as part of the decisions. But as of now, it's part of the broader principles. I indicated earlier, some countries don't want to hear agroecology. At the same time, other countries don't want to hear CSA. Other countries don't want to hear NBS. But at that platform, we need to accommodate every country's perspective so that based on what your priorities are, you can appropriately report on it, implement and then report on it. So that is how things happen at the UNFCCC discussions. Finance, we see it that we have talked about enough about the decisions. So we are now transitioning to implementation. It has been the position of Africa for a long time that we need means of implementation. So as the new NCQR is going to be NCQG, a new common quantifiable goal is going to be discussed. That is on finance, looking at opening up the financing mechanisms to increase the portfolio so that people can access, countries or parties can have more access to finance to implement. Agriculture is very key for Africa because it's the livelihoods of more than 60-70% of the population. Its contribution to GDP of Africa and African countries is also quite high. So we want to ensure that financing agriculture becomes one of the key elements to be discussed under that SCQR.